Okay, so hello and welcome back to another Unity tutorial. In this one, we're going to be covering attributes in the inspector, such as these you see before you. These are the things that I plan on covering, just as notes so I remember to go through each thing. Some of these you'll have seen before, some you won't. Some you'll use, some you won't. It's quite simple like that. I just want to go into them and show you why, what they do and why you could or should use them. Certain things are more useful than others, and some you basically won't use. But if you're looking to write good code, and also if you're working with other people and other people are going to be reading your code, this is especially good to get into the habit of using some of these because it just makes it more readable and more manageable. There's not much more to say. I'll explain each thing as we go along. Obviously, if you like what you see, then share it to other people who use Unity because this is very, very useful. And also, if you do like what you see, then obviously leave a like and subscribe. It would mean a lot. But anyway, let's get into it. So we're going to start off simple and get more difficult. So we start off just game object, this, ignore the rest of stuff, this is from my other tutorial. So we just have a script on an empty game object called inspector tips, because that's what the video is. Anyway, so start off with, when you start programming, you'll have not integers, well you might because that's like the simplest data type to work with, but you'll have variables, that's the first thing you learn about. And in C# you might make an integer x, but you might want it to be public, so you might make a public int x, and you might set it to 100, for example. There you go, that's the simplest thing you'll do. You've got an integer x, and you might use it somewhere like, print x, or in this case, debug.logx, or whatever. But anyway, you'll have that, and you'll go back to your editor, and you'll see it appear. And that's all good, you might have that health, and it'll work fine for your game. But as with anything in coding, there's always best practices. You shouldn't just have everything public. Life would be easy if you could have everything public, and in reality, you can have everything public, but you shouldn't. And the reason's because once you start making everything public, you'll have things changing things that you don't mean to, and you'll accidentally tweak things in the inspector and you don't mean to. And also, it just isn't good. The general rule for public, private, like data, the protection levels or encapsulation levels, is that you should always go for the lowest level that you can. And by lowest level, I mean the highest level of security. So if you can, go for private. If you can't, go for protected. If you can't, go for public. Public should be used the least, or at least like if you can use the others, you should use them. Now, what I mean by this is public can be used anywhere. So if you have something else that has referenced this class, you can change X, which is nice if you need to, but it's also not nice if you don't need to, because you might end up accidentally changing some things where you shouldn't, and you might think, I'm not going to do that, but with a giant project, you probably, well, not probably will, but you might, and it's just good practice to not do it when you, to do it the best way for safety reasons, I guess. So public in X works. Now, as you probably know, if you changed it to private, X would still exist and it will still work if you reference X in here. So if we made like a void start and we had it X, or like debug.log X, that still works even though it's private, obviously. With the downside being that, you can't change X in here once it's compiled because it's private, and then that also means that you can't change X from any other scripts. Obviously, if we said, well, it'll just print it as 100. You might want a variable that's private, but let's say you want, X to be health, like so, and you want to, debug.log health. You want to change health from other places. Let's say you actually only wanted to change it from in here, but you wanted to set it in the inspector. So what you would do is you can keep it private, but you can still change it in the inspector. You can add a tag called, or an attribute called Serialized Field. Now, this just means that the thing after it, or even the thing next to it, you can do it like this. It just means that even though it's private, it's still changeable or accessible in the inspector, though you can't change it from other scripts. So if we went to another script, like this one here from my other tutorial, and if we made a function like, I don't know, public void do something, and if we made that function, what am I doing? If we made that function, and we had reference to the script, so we'll say like inspector tips is equal to get component inspector tips. If we did that, and then we said inspector tips dot health, we don't have access to it, It's inaccessible due to its protection level, because there it is, but we can't do it. If we made it public, then we can access it. There we go. Now, let's say we want it to be public and accessible, but we don't want it. Well, no, first of all, I'll show you proof. It's private now, so obviously we can't access it from here. So let's comment out this line. But if we go back to the inspector, you'll see that even though it's private, once it's compiled, it's still visible and editable in here. Just because serialized field means we'll show it in the inspector, just you can't change it from other scripts. So this is useful for things that you'll only ever change in the script, but you still want to be able to tweak it in the inspector. So you should use this actually. This is probably one of the most useful things that you should use. You'll see a lot of YouTubers using it in their videos if they're doing best practice and, they don't just make everything public. Obviously, you could make it public, but, you shouldn't. And then there's also protected, which is used for inheritance and classes, but base classes, but we're not going to go into that this time. One other useful thing is if you want a public variable, so if you had something that is genuinely, you want it to be public, but so you need it from other scripts, but you don't want to accidentally change it in the inspector, there is hide in inspector, like so. And as you see, it's a public integer, but even though it's public, we can't actually access it in here, it's gone. If we go to another script, health exists because it's public. So it's all to do with getting it right for what you want to use, but making it as safe as you can, hiding stuff as much as you can, but while still being able to use it. Now, this is an integer, and that's great. Let's just leave it as a public int right now. But let's say it's not health. Let's say it's a spell tier that you've got on an object. Now, maybe in your game, there's a maximum spell tier, just like in my game, for example. I don't know what I'm doing with this. Let's just get rid of that line. So you have a spell tier. Now, let's say this, whatever has this class has a spell tier of maximum. Well, let's say it's a maximum tier of 7. Now, what would you normally do? You would just not ever set it higher than 7. But one cool thing you can do is you can add a range attribute, and it takes in a min and a max. So let's say the minimum tier a spell can be is 1, and the maximum is 7. So you'll have range 1, 7 if that's what you want. And then now when you go back to the inspector, you'll see that we actually changed the field from a number selector to be a slider. You can still punch in the number like 7, 1, 2, 3. But if you put in 100 or 1,000, it'll just set it to the max. If you put it to negative 100, it'll set it to the minimum. And you can actually slide this to set the value, which is obviously nice for having a slider just in general. But you can also, it stops you from going below the min and above the max, which is always nice. You should use this quite a lot, actually, if you have values that you know will be between certain range. Though for health, you might not want to use this because obviously the min and max, well, the min's never going to change what the max is, so you don't really want to use it for that. So just use it where you should use it, where it makes sense, but it is useful to use range. Quite a lot of people know about that one as well, but it is useful. Now, that's the stuff with the variables, but let's go into functions. So you have a function and you have some code, and you might write comment, logs this to the console. The bad thing about this is if you ever change what the code before it does, then this might be wrong. You have to remember to change this as well as this, so it's more things to maintain. If you get into a habit like I did for a time, where you do this for every line just to have everything documented, it's a waste. And it also kind of makes people think you got bad code, because code variables should be meaningful. Function names should be they must explain well what a function does. Obviously not super in detail. The function name shouldn't be like it does this, then this, then this, and this. People should know though by the name what it does. Now, I used to comment every so often, but now I've kind of moved over to this new kind of commenting that I found out for functions. So instead of commenting on lines what they do, unless it's some complicated part, I don't know, you should actually just write a function comment. Now, people don't really know these exist, or a lot of people seem to never have used them. Maybe they don't like using them, but it's very useful. So let's say you write your own function. So public void, I don't know, add item. Now, let's see, obviously, if it's something obvious like, add an item, you might not bother. But let's say something like, confusing function. You've got a confusing function. They might not understand exactly what it does by the name of the function, but you can comment on the function. So if you do //, it makes this for you. And in between the summary tags, you can write a description. So if you mouse over this, it says void, because it's a type void, it returns nothing. Inspector tips class, and the function's called confusing function, takes in no parameters. If we type in here a description like this function, now we'll just put like increases the spell tier. I don't know. If you do that and then save and you mouse over this, it actually tells you increases the spell tier. It has a description on it. So if we go over here and we do like inspector tips dot increase. Confusing. Oops, I called it confusing function. We don't know what it does, so we mouse over it and it says increases the spell tier. And we're like, oh, that function does that. So for functions that you might want to write a little description about, so that other people in your team, or just if you're using it and you've not done it in a while, you can actually write a little comment to yourself for a function what it does. Now, this equally works for variables if you wanted to. So spell tier, just put the spell tier. So it's a bit useless if you've got good names. Look, the spell tier. So you can do it. It's not the most useful. Now, you can also do other things with this. So let's say you had a function that took in like parameters. So I could put like a string words, for example. And maybe, return words, because it's going to be a string thing. So it's a useless function. But now when you do it, it sets you up with this. So you can write a summary. So, this function is confusing. That's a useless summary, but you would write whatever it does. Then here it says the parameter words, give it a little description. The words to return, whatever. So now when you mouse over words, it actually tells you the words to return. So you know what each parameter does. And it even says inside the function what that variable means. Obviously you want to put a semicolon. And then returns, you can explain what the actual returns is. So I could put like, I don't know, some cool words or whatever. I don't know. So if we go over here now, we have to actually like give it something. So here. So sometimes this is actually a bit odd. Oh wait. So see, now it's just like a normal function where we can set the variable, but then we've got the description here. Now it's a bit odd. I don't know. Someone might be able to help me on this. With these parameter names, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So if I had like int number, and then I just like copied this. Whoops. I know there's no return number, but we'll just say that. We'll say. See, it doesn't work. If you look here, what it's meant to do is it's meant to say like string this or return this or whatever. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And knowing my luck here, it just didn't work now. So if someone can tell me why this doesn't always work, even though half the time it does. See, it still tells you here what they all do, but I don't know, it's a bit odd. Maybe I've done something slightly wrong, but as I said, sometimes it works for me, sometimes it doesn't. So if anyone actually does use this and they know, then they could correct me. But in reality, the only thing you ever need to comment on is the just summary, which always works, what the function does. So that's that. Now, as well with these variables, let's say it's a string instead of, so let's just get rid of this now. Let's say it's a string spelled here, even though it probably shouldn't be. So we'll just say spell name. What you can actually do is, more fitting, you would have spell description. There's two kinds of text related, well there might be more, but there's two kinds that I know for using text. So for example, we can have text area like this. Now let's just change this so it compiles to spell description. So text area, if you actually go back, well let's first of all, let's look at what a, so when you have a string attribute, and it's public, I think I made it public. Oh, it's not compiling because the other script relies on it. Okay, goodbye. Can't drag. Okay, so it's a normal string field, and you'll have used strings before, and this is what a string field looks like. It's just a little text box, kinda. But it's like one line. It's really awkward, and if you get to the end, it just carries on going, and it's hard to read if you've got a long string. So what we can do is we can actually use text area on a string if it's a long string. And as you see, it will change the input. It's still a string input and it'll read it the same, but it gives you much more room, and it means that you can be like, this is the description, and as you get to the end it goes to the new line, and so on. Now obviously if you go really far, then you get the scroll wheel thing, the drag up and down. That's useful if you've got a long string and you want to be able to read it all at once, so it is useful for descriptions. I recommend using that actually quite a bit. And then there's also multi-line which is slightly different again. So you'll see it change. You can write stuff like this. Now obviously it goes to the next line, but the benefit to this is you can actually have multiple lines in this type of input. That's really helpful as well. As far as I'm aware, this actually reads it as you've got new line characters on the end rather than just like an infinite string with spaces or whatever. It actually reads it like new lines. One other useful thing is we've got headers. So let's say we have a header, and the header is spell stats. We don't want a semicolon, sorry, we want a square bracket. Let me just stop what I just accidentally started. Okay, so we've got a close square bracket. You know, public string spell description. We got public string spell name. Public int spell tier. Let's say this is all the stats you've got, and then you've got down here you can have a header, spell, other stuff or whatever. And you might have some other data like public bool is unlocked, whatever. And then truly you might want to use name and description from elsewhere, but let's say you just want it in here. You know, it's, as I said earlier, you should have private like that, and then you might want a serialized field, which is when I prefer to use it. Like cut and then paste, 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 paste. So obviously these are all private, so you can only access them from in this script, but they're all going to appear in here, and they're going to have headers, which is just a niceness feature. So you can have like the bold title almost, the header as it is, which splits it up, which is useful for just organizing your parameters. It makes life so much easier. So obviously bool, you got your checkbox, you got your spell tier, your description, whatever. It's all nice. This is all stuff that you should use regularly, in my opinion, just to make everything neater. You shouldn't use it in every single script ever. If you've got like 2 parameters, and don't bother. But if you've got a class with lots of parameters, or just even more than a few, you should probably use these where necessary, obviously. Now, what else are we going to end up with? Well, we can use this thing called context menu. So let's say we have a function down here. So let's just get rid of these. So we have a function which is debug.log hello. All right, debug.log hello. Private void. I'm actually not sure if it has to be private or public for this. We'll see. We'll try private, and if it doesn't work, we'll make it public. So private void do something. All right, we'll go with that name. Now, if you actually go into the line before it, we can do context menu, and it takes in a string. So we'll just say, print hello, because that's like almost like a description of it. But the benefit to doing this now is if we go outside, we've got our script here. Now you can actually right click on it and click print hello. You can actually run the function through the script here, print hello, go to the console. That's not the console. If we go to the console, we've actually got hello there 3 times because I just clicked it 3 times. So you can actually run those functions. Now obviously there's differences with functions and the parameters, whatever. But as you see, I've got a private function inside here which I can use. I can call it in the inspector to do it, which is nice. There will be some functions you want to do this for the sake of debugging. It just is really useful. So this is one I actually do recommend using a lot. Like, let's say you had a particular thing you just want to like add to your inventory, or maybe you'll have one for like setting your level, maybe like increasing XP, just like cheat code almost thing, like that kind of thing. For the inspector, it'd be really good. So I do recommend using that. Just give it a name. That's just the name of the command, and then the function you put it above is the function that gets called. So that is useful. Now, one other thing is you can have a function that you call also from inside the game thing. So if you go to the top, you've got your stuff up here. You can actually go to this, and you can write Unity editor dot menu item, and you can give it a name. So it could just say tool slash, and then we can give it a name. So like print hello. I know that's a bit useless, but if we then go here, give it a second. I'm not sure if this only works during play mode, but we'll see. So we go play, console, and if you look up here, we actually have, where am I looking? I've lost it. Or is it because I had it as private? Yeah. Oops. Oh, wait. No, that's the error. Oh, damn it. Let me just press play and then read it. I did something wrong. Oh, wait. I had an error there and it was explaining the problem. Let me just... I want to recompile. Let's just change something. Debug dot hello. I just want to get the error again because I just typed something wrong. Oh, okay. It's just that you have to have it be a static class. I didn't actually know that. I don't remember doing that last time. Now you cause other problems because when you change stuff, yeah, I've already messed up. Anyway, let's just not bother with that one. It's literally the same as the one I showed you, the context menu, but just use the other one. Use context menu to call things. It's much easier. Context menu. There we go. And then obviously give it a name. That's much better. And then finally, the last one is system.obsolete. So basically, if you've ever used certain libraries or certain parts of Unity, which I guess is a library in a sense, is that you'll have some methods that you'll use from other things, and they'll be obsolete, which means that they'll have green underlines, and it'll just mean that the class, the functions, it tells you a little description thing saying, you know, this is an old thing and it still works, but you shouldn't use it anymore because we're going to be getting rid of it soon. That's the usual thing. So if you're someone who makes a library and you maintain it or whatever, you'll get to points where you'll have a function that you want to remake or change. But rather than just deleting it and breaking everyone's code that uses it, you want to, well, obviously if they update to that version, you'll want to have the old function and the new function still in, but you'll want to put this on the old function. And what it means is anyone who uses it will then get guided to use the right one. And then over time, people will use it and they'll get their code set up to use it so that when you then remove the old one, people's code isn't going to break if they actually read this. So for example, we'll make two functions. So we'll have public void new function, like so. And public void old function. So you have new and old function. And then now we'll have a void start method, and in here we'll call old function. Now that's fine, yeah, there's no problem with calling old function. But let's say on old function we say system.obsolete, and we can pass in the string to say. So we can say like, this is old, don't use it anymore. So what happens is, it still works, but if you mouse over it, it basically says inspector thingy is obsolete, and then it gives you a message, this is old, don't use it anymore. So that means that this function still works, but it gives you a nice little warning saying, don't use it anymore, which is quite useful. One sec, there are other parameters. Yeah, you can give an error, okay. It shouldn't cause an error if you use it though, that's the thing, unless you want it to, but you should just give a message. Now as you see it goes green. You could just leave it blank, you could just say thingy's obsolete. I guess it gives a little, you don't want to have that. You'll say like, don't use anymore. Use new function instead. So that now they'll use this old function, they'll be like, oh, I should use new function instead. Okay, new function, boom. And it works and there's no errors. Just keep in mind, the old function will still work. It's just a nice thing to let people know when they're using your thing that you might be getting rid of it soon. You can mention that in your thing. So you should say, use the new function instead. It's better. This is the case for quite a few things in Unity. I've used the particle systems, quite a lot of things that are deprecated. If you've ever used anything and it says something's deprecated, it means it still works, usually, but you should use the new method because it's much better, and soon we might be getting rid of the old one. But anyway, I've covered quite a lot in this video actually. I've gone into depth. A lot of people like how I go into depth in the videos. Rather than rushing over simple things, you should still explain them, because there'll be new people here that don't actually understand what the simple things mean, at least not yet. So I hope this video gave you a good understanding of some simple things in Unity and just coding in general, and some good practice to get into. But yeah, so obviously go away, use these wherever you can. Don't obviously go overboard with using comments and stuff, but function comments on, confusing functions or complex ones. Add all the description to it. Just make your code readable for other people and make it as encapsulated as possible. Use private wherever you can. In my opinion, if you are not sure whether something's going to be public or private, just give it private, write your code, and if you ever get to the point where something says, this doesn't exist because it's protected too much, then you can make it public. But there's still always other ways around it. In most cases, you still have to have public variables sometimes. And then even then, if you have it public, you don't want to use it in inspector by accident. Just make it hide in inspector. So yeah, hope this video helped. If it did, like and subscribe, it'd mean a lot. But anyway, thanks for watching and goodbye.